While at Bernie's Fight Oligarchy tour in Los Angeles, I approached a man holding one of our papers and I said, "Do you think that we need a revolution against the billionaires?" His face lit up, and with a lot of enthusiasm he said, yes, I do. So I asked him what brought him to the event, and he kind of cringed a little bit, his face contorted in disgust, and he said, "I voted for Trump in November and I really regret it." He then said that, these Democrats and these Republicans, they don't represent the working class, they don't care about us, they just want our vote.
He was this middle-aged, disabled veteran. He told me that he feels like working people don't get the respect that they deserve, and even though he didn't love Trump's personality or his antics, he was willing to sort of tolerate it because at least Trump says that he's fighting for the little guy. He feels like Democrats don't represent the interests of working people. I said that as communists, we actually agree with him. You're right, the Democrats don't represent the interests of workers. He was kind of like, well, that's fine and good, but communism is a dictatorship. My response to that was, we live in capitalism, a dictatorship of the rich, and that what communists want is to organize the working class, take political power away from the billionaires, and build a workers' government. He sort of stood there silently for a second, scratched his head, and said, when you put it that way, I think I'm a communist too.
Trump's billionaire government has failed to fix the economy and usher in the golden age that he promised. In fact, things are actually getting worse for the working class. He's put tens of thousands of federal workers out of a job, grocery prices are still up and rising, and the catastrophic results of his tariff plan are now obvious. On the horizon are cuts to Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. This economic situation, as well as his attacks on immigrants and free speech, have sparked protests all across the country. At hands-off rallies, the 50-51 protests, and others, we've met a record number of people that are looking for answers and who are interested in communist ideas. Our newspapers are selling out, and some of the people that are buying issues of the communists and joining the RCA are workers that had formerly voted for Trump. At the same time, supporters of Bernie Sanders have been attending the Fighting Oligarchy tour. At these events too, our comrades are flooded with hundreds of people disappointed by Bernie's attempt to corral the energy back into the rotten Democratic Party. What they're really looking for is a revolutionary alternative. What you're going to hear today are stories from our comrades who have met disaffected Trump voters, demoralized Bernie supporters, and workers who call themselves apolitical, who all share one thing. They are looking for a way forward and finding their answer from the members of the Revolutionary Communists of America. You'll hear personal stories from some of our comrades who were supporters of Bernie Sanders and even volunteered for him. And you'll also hear from comrades who were former Trump supporters. One of them was even an attendee at the January 6th Capitol protests in 2020. These stories provide a glimpse of the mood in America right now. There is real potential for a mass revolutionary party for the working class, and communists must seize this moment.
My name is Kyle, and I'm a member of the Revolutionary Communists of America in Columbia, South Carolina. Trump won the election, and right away, a lot of anti-Trump protests started popping up all over the place. A comrade and I here in Columbia decided to attend one of these protests. There was one guy there who was not your typical person you would find at an anti-Trump rally. He was this middle-aged, disabled veteran, I came to learn after talking to him for a little bit. I asked him, what do you think about Trump? And he told me that he feels like working people don't get the respect that they deserve. He feels like Democrats don't represent the interests of working people, and he was fed up with that. And even though he didn't love Trump's personality or his antics, he was willing to sort of tolerate it because at least Trump says that he's fighting for the little guy. And so what I said next shocked him. I said that as communists, we actually agree with him. That you're right, the Democrats don't represent the interests of workers. He was kind of like, well, that's fine and good, but communism is a dictatorship. My response to that, instead of just writing him off right away, was to explain, well, what do we live in now? We live in capitalism, a dictatorship of the rich, where even though the workers, like he said, the workers do all the work, but the billionaires have all the wealth and they have all the power. They control the government. They control the armed bodies of men that keep workers in line when they want to revolt. And that what communists want is to organize the working class into a party that can chart a revolutionary path forward, take political power away from the billionaires, and build a workers' government in the place of the bourgeois state. He sort of stood there silently for a second, scratched his head, and said, when you put it that way, I think I'm a communist too. It was at that point that we exchanged contact information. This interaction demonstrates that there is a layer of workers who have been deluded by Trumpism, who we can win over with a certain patience and political clarity.
I was out selling the paper with a comrade today when we saw an older man at a bus stop watching us. I called out to him saying, "Hey, how do you feel about billionaires?" And he shook his head side to side, and then he kind of did one of these across his throat. So I walked over to him and just started talking to him about the state of things in America. And he completely agreed with me that right now workers don't have any kind of power in this country, that billionaires control all of our politics, and that there really isn't a party for people like us. He told me about how he has a lot of friends who voted for Trump and are now regretting that decision and are looking for something new. And so I showed him our paper, and I showed him the article about a former Trump supporter who was also disaffected with the Trump administration and wound up joining the RCA after finding us. And he was more than happy to buy a copy from me. And when I handed him the paper, he pointed to the front page and he read out loud, "Youth in America want a revolution." And he said, "Oh, well, I'm 65 years old and I want a revolution too."
So one of our first sales was with a former Trump supporter. He came and told us the story of voting for Trump in the 2020 election and his switch to libertarianism and then up to support for Bernie. He has an interest in socialism, and we discussed RCA's goals, what communism could look like in the future. And a big stopping point for him was, how exactly are we going to do that? How exactly do we get to that point in society where we can do those things? So that's what led to the conversation of the State and Revolution by Lenin and how it goes over those exact points.
That Trump supporter ended up buying State and Revolution.
Hi, my name's Robert. I voted for Trump in 2016, and now I'm a revolutionary communist. So I remember growing up in, a very conservative household. We used to watch the Obama debates, and my dad would kind of sit behind me, like grinding his teeth. And he used to explain that, it didn't really matter what these people said. They've all been in power for like a prolonged period of time, and they never actually do the things that they campaign on, right? They're all liars. They're all crooks. And so I remember saying something along the lines of, well, you should run for president, right? You're not a liar. You're not a politician. And you could just kind of proclaim that, right? Say, I'm just someone who sees the problems that we have in society, and I want to do something about it. I'm not this career politician. And at the time, it was just like a funny little kid thing to say, oh, yeah. But lo and behold, a couple years later, Trump kind of roars onto the scene with very similar messaging. Watching the Trump debates, he would get up on stage and say, these people are liars. They're crooks. They've had power this entire time. They say they're going to fix these problems, but they never do. And, I'm an outsider. I want to come in and smash the establishment. So it really spoke to that discontent, right? That simmering kind of anger that was like, well, we all know we're being lied to, but what can we do about it? And so I was excited to be a part of that kind of movement that was going to shake up Washington, clear out the corruption. But by the end of Trump's first presidency, that idea, seemed silly. I was completely disillusioned. It had been 4 years of all of the problems that Trump said he was going to solve, where fundamentally, nothing had changed. I kind of slowly went through a radicalization process just with, online spaces. Eventually, I started calling myself a communist, but it wasn't until the October 7th attacks and Israel's genocidal response against the Palestinians that I really said to myself, it wasn't enough. And I didn't even really say that to myself, right? I could feel it. Like, how can I sit here and do nothing, right? I have to fight against this. It was like something was pulling me out of my chair. I went to a couple of these kind of just spontaneous organizers meeting to figure out, okay, how are we going to fight against this thing? There was really no unifying voice, right, that could say, clearly what is the problem, right? There were just different, like, oh, well, let's stop this factory, or let's do this or that, support this or that policy. And so it wasn't until I went to a city council meeting where we had planned to protest that one of the members of, at the time it was Socialist Revolution, went up to speak in front of the city council members. And she actually turned her back to the city council members and just addressed the people there. Something along the lines of, these people behind me, they don't care about the Palestinians. They don't even care about the homeless people in our city. They don't care about fighting climate change. They don't care about our declining wages. They don't care about any of that stuff. They care about their political careers. They care about their, comfy positions. And, if we want to actually do something about these problems, it's not enough to just have this or that action or support this or that policy. We need a fundamental transformation of society. We have to sweep these people away. And when I heard that, all I could remember thinking was, I have to talk to this person, right? That was the coolest thing that I've ever seen. And so I met with her outside after the meeting. There were a couple comrades there. I bought an issue of what was then Socialist Revolution. And, I read it, and I went home, and I signed up to join the day after.
Hey, comrades. My name's Oliver Robinson. I grew up in one of the poorest states in the country, Louisiana, in one of the poorest parishes or counties, into a very poor working class family. My mother, around the time of the Great Recession, was critically injured, ruining her ability to work, rendering her bedridden, and that put us, in a very tough state with the economy. And so my stepdad, in order to pay for her insurance, abandoned his job as an electrical engineer and joined the military because they had some of the best insurance available, and she needed procedures desperately. They were going to ship him out to Yemen to go blow some people up. While training, he was injured. He had 3 herniated discs slip in his back from a malfunction or some oversight within the training process, not even in the field. And he obviously couldn't perform his duties, and he was honorably discharged with a meager $800 a month pension. And that is what my family has lived on for the last 15 years, roundabout. So I grew up being the poorest people we knew. We never went hungry, but we never had money to fix the house when the roof leaked. We never had money to fix the car. We had to rely on the wealthier grandparents to kind of donate us used vehicles. College was only affordable for me because of Pell Grants, which I hear now under Trump and Musk's Doge is getting pulled back itself. And on top of that, the VA is known for its crisis. So the pension program never came through on time. We were back owed probably about $15,000 worth of money from the military for my stepdad's, retirement. And we had to hire a lawyer to get that. And by the time we finally got it, about 6 or 7 years later, the lawyer took about 60% of it. So needless to say, we had an immense hatred of the federal government within my household. There was nobody who could help us articulate that. It was just frustration and reaction. But it was when Trump came along that kind of anger was able to have an outlet. When he arrived, we became political. I never heard my parents talk much about politics. They were kind of normal working class people. But when Trump came around and he started talking about fighting the system and defeating the corrupt bureaucrats of Washington, and even a little bit of the racist kind of playing on immigrants taking our jobs and taking our healthcare and stuff, that all found resounding ears in a poor, rural, southern household. 2016, I can remember watching it with my family. It felt like a triumph. It felt like not only had we given a kick in the teeth to the establishment, but we had finally, the people, taken power into their own hands, or so it felt. Obviously, needless to say, 2016 to 2020, things only got worse. There was not a whole lot of major improvement, although my mother will still tell you that gas prices went down for a period, so I guess there's that. But, I was a high school student, largely disconnected from the economy, getting rides with my friends, eating the free school lunch, I was worried about ridiculous culture war stuff on Instagram and Twitter, not real issues that workers face. I was propagandized by this kind of us versus them. So 2020, I was 19. It was the first election I could vote in, and we made it a family affair. It was cementing our gains of our revolution as we kind of saw it. And it was a proud time. Of course, lesser evilism, as we know, won out. Trump did not deliver on his promises, and the working class noticed. And Biden came into office saying he was not going to be that. He was defeated by the establishment in our eyes. And despair quickly set in for a couple of days until the Stop the Steal phenomenon kind of happened on social media, and we were tuned in. We were keeping track of every single court case that had gone and getting thrown out. And we said, oh, it's just the corrupt courts. You know, they're just full of Obama appointees or people paid off by the Democrats, which, now that I understand what the state is, might be true. But at the time, we were very politically uninformed. And it was Christmas break when the January 6th Stop the Steal rally was announced. I'd never been to the Capitol. Neither had two of my buddies. We had a car. We had gas money. And we said, let's do it. Let's get in the car and we'd go. We thought that we were going to an event that would radically change the country. There's a very revolutionary tradition, or I guess ideology within the Trump movement that he preys on. And you still talk to MAGA people today, they will proudly say that they are the revolution and that you just got to wait and things will get better. So we went. We wanted to be a part of that. It was the most people I'd ever seen all together in my life. And every single person we talked to, I mean, we talked to people from South Vietnam, from Canada, from all over the country, mostly poor workers who had a similar story, often involving an injury or a layoff from '08 or, I guess we call it DEI now, but they'd say affirmative action back in the day, beating them out, or immigrants, the usual stuff you hear from right-wing reactionaries. And everybody had a deep personal connection to an injustice from the capitalist system that Trump was preying upon for his own political gain. I don't really remember Trump's speech. I was really far away. He was on some giant billboards, but between all the MAGA flags and pictures of Rambo with a machine gun with Trump's face on it, I didn't get much out of it. But it seemed like before he even said the famous words, "We're going to march to the Capitol," that the march had already started, shouting chants like, obviously "Stop the Steal," "We're not going to take it." I saw the barricades get toppled, just not even by singular guys pushing it, but just a mass of people making their way through. Thank goodness I had a smarter, wiser, more patient friend than me next to me who grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "Do not go in there. This to me looks like a coup. I won't be a part of it." And while I disagree that it was a coup in the strategic sense of the word, I do agree that he was right. Because as we know, most people who went inside were fairly heavily prosecuted by the Biden regime. I distinctly remember that as we're getting on the interstate to head back south into Virginia, there was an army of Blackhawks. I mean, I've never seen this kind of, it looked like the evacuation of Vietnam. The Pentagon is right off the interstate, for those of you who don't know. And as we passed, it looked like a fortress. Armed to the teeth, military vehicles, Blackhawks, you name it, they had it. Looking back, the anger that I felt in that moment, the anger that had been building up as I'd grown up in this world that I'd been told used to be so great, literally what Make America Great Again means. This was a crowd of working class people that had been whipped up by Trump and his cronies, and we'd been used. So that clearly wasn't the answer. I had a lot of time to reflect on it. COVID hit, kind of solidified that reflection period. The devastating effects on the economy and my social life showed me that obviously the Democrats weren't the answer. January 6th showed me that Trump was a grifter. That wasn't the answer. And so I slowly started making my way to socialism. I identified with Bernie a lot originally. But I was actually reminded by MAGA people that he had sold out to the Democrats. And, reformism wasn't going to work that way. So by the time Trump ran again, I was older. I had been through college. I had learned some history of, revolutions of America, of political parties, of other events like the Veterans March on the Capitol that Patton put down with tanks. I identified with that a lot. I looked into that and did some projects on it. And shortly after I became a communist, before the election. But never once have I judged a MAGA voter in the way that these liberals do, which is to dehumanize them and to see them as just the enemy and just faceless, stupid mobs. I can't, because those are my people. The only thing that's going to show them is time and events. Just like me, I believe they'll come to the same conclusions. Trump failing to deliver this second time around, as we know he will make 1 million more communists just like me.
Since his first campaign in 2016, Trump actually shared part of his voter base with Bernie Sanders. However, Sanders caved to the Democratic Party establishment, backing Clinton, then Biden, then Kamala. So in the eyes of millions, Trump became the only alternative to the hated status quo. But now his second disastrous presidency is already pushing people in the opposite direction.
While at Bernie's Fight Oligarchy tour in Los Angeles, I approached a man holding one of our papers and I said, "Do you think that we need a revolution against the billionaires?" His face lit up and with a lot of enthusiasm he said, yes, I do. So I asked him what brought him to the event, what brought him to the Fight Oligarchy tour. And he kind of cringed a little bit, his face contorted in disgust. And he said, "I don't think that you're going to like me, but I voted for Trump in November and I really regret it." So I asked him what convinced him to vote for Trump, what pushed him in that direction. He said grocery prices. So I asked him what convinced him in the other direction. What made him regret that decision? He said grocery prices. Trump on day one said that prices would go down, but I still can't afford to eat. He lied and I'm sick of it. He then said that, these Democrats and these Republicans, they don't represent the working class. They don't care about us. They just want our vote.
At this rally in Los Angeles alone, we sold close to 200 copies of The Communist, and more than 80 people signed up to join the RCA. This Fighting Oligarchy tour has attracted the biggest crowds that Sanders has ever seen. 35,000 people in Denver and Los Angeles each. This is remarkable and shows just how ripe the conditions are for a genuine fight back. Not just against Trump and his billionaire government, but against the Democrats as well. Only 27% of voters have a positive view of the Democrats. That's a record low. Unfortunately, instead of breaking with this capitalist outfit and starting an independent working class party, Bernie is trying to revive the Democrats. Many of our members have gone through the school of Bernie Sanders, and they can see that it's the same failed strategy that he's been pursuing for 10 years.
So in high school, I read the Communist Manifesto because I had to. It was an assignment. And I immediately was like, well, I guess I'm a communist. This is the best thing I've ever read. But there was nothing in the United States to do with that new knowledge until Bernie ran for president 10 years later. And I'm like, finally, it's cool to be a socialist again. And we could have a socialist president.
In 2015, 2016, I was definitely a huge Sanders supporter. At the time, after the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, in the context of the weakest economic recovery in US history post-2008, I was really, really ecstatic that someone was fighting the billionaires, refusing corporate donations, running on a campaign only built around individual, working supporters' donations. And I was also really attracted to the fact that he was using the term socialism. For me, that was proof that, oh, look, millions of Americans aren't turned off by socialism. In fact, they're quite interested and enthusiastic about it if they are shown that socialism actually means a fight against the billionaires, against the rich, and against the political establishment. And I volunteered for Bernie throughout 2016.
Bernie's really the first guy who put socialism on the map for me. I voted for him in 2016. His appeals for free healthcare for all, free education, all of these ideas, they really resonated with me at the time.
I had moved towards Bernie while I was working at a charter school. It was a conservative charter school. I felt like I was the rebel in the office of this fishbowl of 60 people because everyone else was living relatively traditional lives, and I was in favor of Medicare for all. But after Bernie's capitulation, there didn't feel like there was any steam to move forward or that there was anything to get involved with.
Suddenly, he's not running for president anymore, and I was really confused why, because, some people were saying it was the Democrats who betrayed him, and some pieces of news would say, well, he lost elections, which I think wasn't true. And then, really the truth was that he gave up, he gave in, but I didn't realize that.
I did start to read a little bit more about socialism and then eventually about communism after he dropped out of the race in 2016. I had a very distorted and confused view of communism. I didn't really get organized in any way, and most of the ideas that I had about communism came from the internet, left at the time.
He capitulated to Hillary Clinton. And for me, I don't know if I would use the term demoralizing, but it definitely was upsetting. And I ended up protesting Hillary at the Democratic National Convention. And I was definitely still looking for an outlet. I'm very proud of myself to say that I did not vote for Hillary in 2016, or Trump for that matter. I on my own maintained a little bit of class independence, but I was still looking for an outlet, looking for something to actually do to fight the billionaires. And in 2017, very, very accidentally, I ended up in a meeting of what later became the RCA, 5 or 6 comrades or so. And they explained to me what Marxism is, what communism is, the need for working class independence. And they showed me what they had been writing and explaining about the Bernie Sanders phenomenon for years that I thought was very, very attuned with my understanding of things, and I think a lot of other people supported, understanding of things. And in a certain way, Bernie Sanders' arrival on the scene was very indicative of the potential for socialism, the potential for radicalism, and the building an independent working class party. That was a positive development, but ultimately it was taken in the wrong direction by Bernie.
It wasn't until I had found the RCA a couple of years later that I had already read Marx and I had read Lenin, and I had been drawn to the ideas generally, but actually meeting a unapologetic communist in the flesh actually drew me into the organization, into the need for political life. And I went through a number of different changes in 2018 and 2019 when I had gotten involved with the party, but just the amount of passion and the genuine desire to change the entire world in this root and branch way, there was nothing quite like that. And so it was interesting when Bernie ended up running again in 2020 and going to some of the rallies, then putting forward the paper and putting forward the ideas, that we were finding other people who were also interested, generally speaking, but there was still these illusions just before the COVID-19 pandemic.
When 2020 rolled around, I was in grad school at the time, and of course his same calls for free education really resonated with me once again. I had over $200,000 in student debt from grad school, and I was a bit more familiar with the ideas of socialism and communism.
After Bernie was pushed out of the race and he capitulated again, and we met a lot of people from the Democratic Socialists of America, for instance, who were looking for a much more radical answer than just tailing the Democrats. We grew quite a bit in that period.
I saw how he was snubbed out of the race in 2020. He was working through a party that was working against him. I was already feeling pretty down because this was in the midst of the pandemic. It was in April, so the pandemic had been going strong for a month. And I opened my phone to see Bernie Sanders drops out of the race, and it just shattered my heart. This was the second time Bernie had capitulated, and I was absolutely distraught. I don't recommend this for most people, but in this one instance, it worked in my favor. Someone had posted a link to a statement put out by the then IMT, or International Marxist Tendency, that said, "Don't mourn, organize." And I think that was exactly what I needed to read at that time. So I clicked on the link, I read the statement, and all of it is exactly what I had already had on my mind. Ever since then, I have been a member of the RCA.
A DSA chapter popped up in my area in Arizona, which was considered at the time a conservative stronghold with Joe Arpaio and just horrible, horrible immigration policies. So I was really excited because I could go be a socialist. Finally I can be a socialist. But I get there and it's a bunch of activism, right? And it's let's go protest in front of Lockheed Martin with 5 other people and do stuff like go to the border and try to alleviate the crisis by like hiding water in the dirt. And like, that is really valiant stuff. But what I wanted was to get rid of capitalism because I was a socialist. Like I wanted to get rid of that stuff, like end it for good. And then I dropped out. I stopped going because I was depressed. I felt hopeless. That all I could do was like chip away at the problem and never really fix it. And then, I don't know, related to that, and also my mental health, I had like one of the worst depression crises I've ever had. And I was just like, I gotta get out of my house. Like, I gotta go try again. So I go back to DSA like a year later. But this time I'm like, I wanna think about what I'm doing. Like, I wanna figure out how to actually end this. And luckily at the time there was a political education series and they were reading Marx. And I was like, oh, I like this. This is what I wanted to figure out because I want to figure out what to do about this. And it happened to be run by comrades in an organization that were communists and were actually saying verbatim, we can have socialism in our lifetime. Here's how. And it turned out to be the RCA under a different name. And now I'm a member.
And now with this Fight Oligarchy tour, I think what is really promising, not about the tour itself, but the energy that it's attracting. Because Sanders hasn't really changed. He's giving the same message that he's been giving for the last 9 years, which is essentially to work within the left of the possible, so to speak, to work within the Democratic Party. But the people that we meet there, we ask them, do you have any faith in the Democratic Party to change society? And they say, no, why would I have any faith in the Democratic Party to do that? And we ask them, if they think there should be a class-independent workers' party in this country. And they say, absolutely, I register as an independent. But every single person that we talked to at this recent Tempe, Arizona rally, they describe themselves as an independent, right? I think what this really shows is that people are moving away from traditional politics, or moving away from the realm of the possible, quote unquote, to understanding that we have to move beyond these institutions. Everyone recognizes that the liberals aren't going to do anything to oppose Trumpism, and neither are the liberal socialists going to be able to do anything. And what we need is a revolutionary program that's going to change society entirely.
We can build that party that can, at a certain point, galvanize and organize those same types of workers who have all of the right instincts in looking for a political alternative to the establishment.
He had this massive potential to break from the two-party system, to gather these forces and build a mass workers' party. He failed to do that. And it really led a lot of people that I know, a lot of leftists, down this road of demoralization, of doom and despair. And now that I'm a member, I'm really trying to prevent that doom and despair from spreading too much, and showing my friends and also just people in the streets that there is another option, that we can build a mass working class party, and that we shouldn't mourn, but we should instead get organized.
The ruling class wants us to think that it's just Democrats versus Republicans. But the reality is that when we talk to people on the streets, they want to take a fight to the billionaires, to the capitalists. It's not just Trump and Bernie supporters that are coming to us. Events have pushed people who never leaned strongly in either direction towards our comrades. These people that might call themselves apolitical are now asking our comrades, what is going on and what can we do about it?
My name is Isaac. I'm a member of the RCA here in Dallas-Fort Worth in Texas. I've always had strong opinions and been radicalized by things going on around me, but only after joining the party and studying Marxist theory and really grounding myself in that, my people around me have noticed. And when things in the news or in our daily lives inevitably come up in conversation, they notice that I always have something to say with a lot of conviction, usually. And that's happening more so now than it has in previous periods, as crazy as they've been, especially since Trump's election. Around last winter, I was staying with some family members, and one of them, he came across a video on YouTube from a channel called Crash Course. This is a pretty popular educational channel. I think most people around my age, around 19 to 21 or so, have seen this channel in classrooms or just on YouTube, where they talk about philosophy, history, and other educational topics. And they put out a video titled something like, "Who was Karl Marx and why are we still talking about him?" And yeah, this family member, he said, "Oh, I saw this video and I'm pretty sure I saw the group you're in that video." And he was right. There were clips of them in the video agitating with the now iconic, the "Are you a communist?" banners and flyers, which he had seen on my notebooks and water bottles and all that. But the ideas interested him, and he knew this was where I was getting all of my analysis of things going on. So I encouraged him. I said, if you want to learn about this stuff, learn it from the real Marxists themselves. And I convinced him to order a book called What is Marxism on our bookstore, well-read books. And so he bought it, and he's been reading it ever since. And I'm going to check in next time I see that family member and see what he thinks. And this was a family member who was a very traditional liberal, someone who was bordering on apolitical, who just very unenthusiastically would vote for Democrats, just wanting things to be fine, just wanting to, live their life, not have to pay attention to the things going on in society. But of course, that's becoming impossible. I mean, this conversation about the YouTube video happened right after Trump's election. And so to fast forward from that, I mean, with the trade war brewing and all the shock and awe tactics Trump is using, the constitutional havoc he's wreaking, and all of these things, there's a lot of panic in the news headlines. And so one of my roommates here, just on a whim, I mean, we were just in the apartment, asked me, all stressed out, knowing that I was a member of a communist party, he asked me something like, well, what is going on? Why are people being deported like this? Why is this happening? And why is the U.S. bullying countries all around the world? And how can it get away with that? How is it that the United States is in a position to do that at all? And so we talked for about 10, 20 minutes, and there was only so much I could do in one conversation. And I said, hey, you should buy this newspaper. I mean, we're talking about all these questions you have about what's happening right now. And so I think he's bought 3 issues now. He gets them from me whenever they come out. But even more, the question of why is the United States such a large power? How can it do what it does? Why is it that every other country in the world, why is it that their headlines revolve around what the United States is doing? And that's a really big topic to cover in one conversation. So I said, hey, there's this book called Colossus that we put out, the party put out, and we're having a reading group about it. And on a whim, I mean, this is someone who is incredibly apolitical, who just wants to go to college and, get a degree and just, have a good life and all that. And no, very little political talk. And just out of nowhere, he's asking me these kinds of things. And so he began reading Colossus. He reads my copy at the apartment, and hopefully he'll get his own. But I mean, that book exists to explain how the United States rose to where it came from. I mean, most people, you grew up in the United States, we're taught a very surface level history of the United States. We're only taught the surface level events, and we're not taught what really drove, all of the development and all of the imperialist adventures and coups and so on. And so, yeah, that's just 2 examples I've seen of the objective situation here, where people around me who typically wouldn't consider themselves political are now actively buying materials from the RCA and more importantly, they're looking into the ideas, the revolutionary ideas, which all of us aren't given by the main news outlets or, our curriculum here in school. These are ideas that need to be out in society, and it's our job as communists to put them out there. I mean, if the current political climate tells you anything, it's that we are in a crisis, and the old way of ruling is not working anymore. And we're all going to need to learn fast how we can organize society in a more rational way.
And there's one group of people that we left out of this podcast, but that we should really be paying particular attention to, and that's people that are already communists right now. We've talked about the poll that showed that 20% of young people consider communism their ideal economic system. But this isn't just a number. We see these people and meet them in real life. On the same day that the Fighting Oligarchy tour happened in Los Angeles, I was in Bushwick in Brooklyn in New York City at a train station. And we were asking people, what do you think of billionaires? Do you want a revolution? And the people that came up to us, we would then ask them if they were communists. A lot of these people said yes, that they were communists. If you go out and ask people if they're communists, you're going to find out that there is a lot more than you think there are.
We just sold out of all of our papers that came. Quinn and I came with 35.
Yeah, I think I had like 50.
I had to give up 2 of mine that I had in my backpack. And all of these experiences show us that in the deep crisis of world capitalism, people are grasping for a leader that's going to fight the status quo. But Trump can't solve the crisis of capitalism. And his demagogic appeals to workers will fall flat at some point. And they are falling flat in real time with a lot of workers that voted for him. And Bernie Sanders has continued to put the discredited Democrats on stage at his Fighting Oligarchy tour. These supporters of Bernie, Trump, the apolitical people, and the communists that are out there are looking for answers and are looking to get organized. The question is, who's going to be there to answer their questions and organize them? Nobody but the revolutionary communists of America are putting forward a class-independent path for workers and building a revolutionary party. Join us in building that party.